Here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner. On today's show,
The government will relocate asylum seekers to ex-military bases and barges in an attempt to end the use of migrant hotels. Other floating accommodation is also reportedly being considered, including disused cruise ships and ferries. What's it going to mean?
Long overdue, I think. The Northern Ireland Secretary will be talking about why this security level has been raised far higher in the province.
Also, Humza Yousaf will join a formal session to swear him in as Scotland's 6th First Minister. He also becomes the youngest and first minority ethnic First Minister. We'll bring you the very latest analysis as it happens.
And they're off on their first official state visit. The King and Queen Consort will arrive in Germany later today. Of course, the trip to France was cancelled. Rather embarrassing for the President there because of all those riots.
That's right. The royals will be in Germany. Also, tributes have, of course, been pouring in this morning for the legendary TV presenter Paul O'Grady, who has died at 67. Send us your thoughts and reflections on him and what a great entertainer he was. GBviews at gbnews.uk.
He was a nice bloke too.
Really nice bloke. We've both got little stories about him, I think, haven't you? So, lots to come. First of all, here's your news with Ray Addison.
Good morning, it's 9:32. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Thousands of asylum seekers are to be housed at old military bases and on a giant barge in plans due to be announced by the Immigration Minister later today. The move will be the first major step in the government's pledge to end the controversial practice of housing asylum seekers in expensive hotel accommodation. Robert Jenrick will unveil initial proposals to move around 3,000 migrants from hotels into 2 disused RAF bases. GB News understands that the Home Office has already secured the use of the former RAF base at Wethersfield in Essex and RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire. Well, a new survey has found that public satisfaction with the NHS has dropped to its lowest level since the survey began in 1983. The British Social Attitudes Survey also shows that dissatisfaction has doubled in the last 2 years. However, 29% of people still support the service and are satisfied with how it runs. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting told GB News the main issue is staffing.
The NHS has suffered from terrible mismanagement over the course of the last 13 years by the Conservatives that's left the system desperately short of the staff it needs to get patients seen on time. That's led to the highest waiting lists in the history of the NHS and the lowest patient satisfaction ever. And what I hear commonly from patients, and I experienced this a bit myself with my experience with kidney cancer a couple of years ago, people could not be more praising of NHS staff. They think they're doing a brilliant job, but there simply aren't enough of them.
And the King and Queen Consort will arrive in Germany for their state visit this afternoon. They're both expected to receive military honours at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, followed by a state banquet hosted by Germany's president in the evening. It's Charles and Camilla's first foreign visit as heads of the royal family, but the King's 29th trip to Germany. We're on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn too. This is GB News. Back now to Andrew and Bev.
Big day in Parliament today because the government is going to announce thousands and thousands of asylum seekers being taken out of 400 hotels and put on places like former military bases, disused ferries and the like.
So this decision is likely to be popular with many across the country, where around 400 hotels are currently accommodating more than 51,000 asylum seekers.
Joining us in the studio is the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Henry, he's definitely, the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, are on the front foot on immigration. I think a lot of people think it's outrageous. It's costing £150 a day to keep a migrant in a hotel. Some people watching this programme would think wouldn't be able to afford to pay £150 for a hotel. But is this policy going to work?
It's definitely better. Basically, what you need, given it takes ages to get people through the British asylum system, because it can take several years to process a claim.
Which is ridiculous.
Which is ridiculous, and which is something the government's trying to address with legislation. But currently it can take years, and there are lots of them. And so you need somewhere to put them. Now, the perfect solution would be a purpose-built asylum estate, right, which the Home Office could run, which you could keep people in. That, unfortunately, one, most MPs don't want that in their constituency, and two, the left will go around calling them prison camps. So they haven't been built, and so you have the question of where to put them. We've been putting them in hotels, which is very expensive, very disruptive, also quite hard to police. If you're worried about people absconding and going to work in the black economy, a hotel is not a prison. You can leave it relatively easily. So this proposal is instead that we will use military bases, which tend to be more remote, and ships, which obviously you can move around.
But Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, hardly leading from the front on this for the government, he's objecting to the idea that one of these camps is in his constituency.
Yeah, this is basically, if Britain had one root problem for so many of the things, it's the fact that MPs are like, yes, but not here. Every single time.
Not
Houses,
in my backyard.
Yes, but not here. Railways, yes, but not here. Migrant detention centres, yes, but not here. He really should have shown more leadership on this, because ultimately, it doesn't have to be in the middle of town. You can put a military base. A military base is almost definitionally.
Well, it is a form of military base, isn't it?
Yeah, precisely. And normally, these aren't like the old Victorian barracks, which are all right in the middle of town. Most military bases now are out in the countryside a little bit, and they've got fencing and all the rest of it. It's fine. That's an obvious place to put people.
Yeah.
It's costing, Henry, at the moment, £7 million a day, as Andrew said, £150 a day per person for a hotel. Do we know what the cost saving will be with these new measures?
I don't know if we've seen an explicit number, and I would be dubious about it if it came from the government, because obviously they will try and upplay it.
It doesn't sound like it could be necessarily that much cheaper.
Well, I suppose the advantage is, if it's a long-term investment, is that if you're buying rooms in hotels, you're paying for those rooms all of the time, whereas the advantage of a government-run estate is that there's a higher upfront cost of setting it up. But then you basically can run it free because you're paying it for yourself. Well, not free, but at cost, because you're not having to pay private providers.
Sure.
So that's where the saving would come from.
Tom Harwood is with us as well in the studio this morning, Deputy Political Editor Tom. When do you think we might get any visuals on these numbers? Because, in a way, I take Henry's point is that we're putting this up front now. Well, that would suggest they think they're going to continue to need this accommodation. Surely the issue should be solving the problem, not creating permanent housing, which is cheaper.
Yes, I think what we're going to hear today from the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, is a lot of proposals and explorations, really. We heard already this morning from the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, that a lot of these things are being explored, or that the intention to look at them are there. I don't think we're going to necessarily see the full picture today, and that includes whether or not there's going to be a barge moored in some facility somewhere, and whether or not that has already been procured, the ability to make it fit for human living, or exactly which precise sites have been selected. We might hear the generality today, but getting down into the detail and the specifics, we might have to wait a little bit longer.
That's because there's not many specifics in the legislation.
Certainly, and what the legislation will do is give ministers powers to then go after those particulars, and no doubt that is when we're going to see a lot of heat and debate in Parliament, particularly from people, much like the Foreign Secretary, who may not want facilities in their own areas. That is going to be a big bone of contention.
Will Labour oppose this?
Probably.
Which is good for the Tories?
Yeah, I think the problem that Labour have is that what we constantly get is people saying, actually, what you need is, like, safe and legal routes and so on. But actually, that's not an alternative to enforcement, because you're always going to have people who try and cheat the system. And what Labour don't really have is a clear answer for what they're going to do to deal with people who they don't want to let in. They don't want to. They're certainly not saying that they want to let everyone in, which is the position of some of the, like, activists and lobbyists that will be on their backs about this. But unless they come up with a coherent position, it will be very easy for Rishi Sunak to say, OK, you don't like this proposal, but what would you do with these people? And so Keir Starmer will need to have an answer to that.
One of the contentious issues is about children, isn't it? And the fact that children will now be treated the same as other asylum seekers and held in detention, which Rishi Sunak is meant to be a deterrent for families crossing this particularly treacherous route, as it can be. That's controversial, isn't it? I mean, that Labour can make a lot of that.
They can, potentially. I think an awful lot of it comes down to the standards of these new facilities, right? I mean, when we say we're going to keep children in these places, I mean, that's only bad if these are bad places to stay.
It's bad on a boat. Let me tell you, if you've ever been in a boat with children, it's it's stressful. You know, they'll have to consider having children and toddlers running around on a boat.
Well, I mean, that doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world if we're talking about things for which a government can actually be indicted. But, of course, there will be a larger state. Maybe you can prioritise families on the actual basis, and you can put other people on the barges. I mean, there's room for all those kinds of discretionary decisions. But ultimately, I think part of the problem for the government is, if these places are so bad that sending children there is a scandal, should we be sending anyone there at all?
We've also seen, haven't we, flashpoints at some of these hotels, which we really got to try and crack down. And we saw it in Newquay this week, where local people, or people being bussed in, I'm not sure, objecting and protesting to the fact that hotel accommodation has been taken over by migrants. So this is another way of trying to perhaps improve social cohesion.
Yeah, absolutely. These people need to be stored. They need to be housed somewhere while we're processing them. They cause disruption, often in communities where they are. The best place is to try and keep them in places which are sort of slightly withdrawn from those communities. Military bases, boats in the right shipyards and so on are exactly the kind of thing that at least ticks that box if we won't build purpose-built accommodation.
But ultimately, the issue here, of course, is that it's taking 2 years to process people when it used to take 2 weeks. Now, it's one thing to keep someone on a barge for 2 weeks while their case is being looked at. It's another thing to keep them in a hotel or on a barge or in a facility for 2 years. So I think the two-pronged approach from this, certainly with the extra processing agents that have been hired by the government or are being hired by the government, will be attempting to keep that detention period as short as possible. Then it becomes a bit of a different conversation. But ultimately, the starting point here is we're spending £6 million a day on almost 400 hotels, predominantly in England.
Outrageous.
And clearly there is very little consent for this. The question is, how do you move on from that?
We shouldn't forget, Tom, as well, in Scotland, a lot of the Ukrainian refugees in Scotland are being kept on a boat.
Yes, and
there's been no protest about it in Scotland?
There's been no protest about it in Scotland. It's really interesting, actually, looking at the differentiation between how many asylum seekers are actually being kept in Scotland versus England as well. Very few hotels in Scotland have been requisitioned, many in England. And it's interesting, looking at the rhetoric of the SNP, saying that we want to be a much more welcoming country, indeed criticising the government of the United Kingdom. Well, it's interesting that the Scottish government have actually not been living up to their rhetoric and have been criticising the English government that has been the one that's been requisitioning the hotels. It's
double standards
very muddy.
Politicians, Tom.
Who'd have thought it?
Let's bring in former Chief Immigration Officer for the UK Border Force at Calais, Kevin Saunders. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Bev.
Good morning. Does this sound like a solution to you? You have huge experience in this area.
Yes, this is an absolutely much better idea. We've got 383 hotels scattered across the UK. You're quite right about Scotland. There aren't very many there, or Wales. There are only 2 in Wales. So, yes, this is a much better idea. We're going to have Scampton, we believe, which is just down the road from me, and 1,500 people there. Yeah, good idea. It'll work. It will work. It's much better to concentrate, from an operational point of view, to concentrate this sort of number of people in one place so that we can quickly send officers to deal with the asylum claims.
Kevin, Scampton is the former RAF base. Is there any local opposition building up to the idea that thousands or hundreds potentially are going to be moved there?
Yeah, just a bit. The usual people have come out to complain. The local MP has come out to complain. Every excuse under the sun they've tried to use. But realistically, Scampton has only just decommissioned, so a lot of the infrastructure is still there. So to bring it up to standard will be relatively cheap and relatively quick as well. So Scampton, I'm afraid, is a very good idea.
Why haven't they done it before, Kevin?
I don't really... Well, Scampton has... The Red Arrows have only just left Scampton. So Scampton is one that they couldn't use. They have tried it before. They tried it at Linton-on-Ouse. But again, the locals complained like mad and the government backed down. So they have tried it before. I'm not quite so happy about putting people on boats, barges, not boats. Boats are fine. Barges, a little bit worried about, but we'll have to see what happens. And with children, where you were talking about detaining children, we're detaining children in families. Unaccompanied children will still be dealt with by the local authority, and there is a big difference there. There's nothing wrong with putting children and their families onto cruise liners, or old cruise liners or ferries. There's no safety problem there. I go on cruise holidays, and my children always used to go to the play clubs on the boats. So it can be perfectly safe.
Do we know where the boats are going to be moored at this point, Kevin? Do you know?
Well, I haven't heard, and it was a question I was asking yesterday, but I can't get an answer about where they're going to put the boat.
Have you seen that at all, Henry?
No.
No, we haven't.
Well, that's what Darren was saying. The detail is not fleshed out in the bill, is it? It's almost like they make it up as they're going along.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly the case. And really, one of the interesting points, actually, about the detail of this is that we're talking about the barges and the detention facilities and all of this as if we're going to see some great sort of exodus from the hotels. One thing we do know is that those who are currently in hotels will not be moved into these facilities. These facilities will be for new arrivals who are coming instead. So the current almost 400 hotels that have been block booked out by the government will remain.
Gosh.
Fascinating.
That is fascinating. It really does suggest they're not trying to solve the problem, they're just trying to provide more accommodation. Although, having spoken to Kevin Saunders on many occasions, that's the only time he said, yeah, this will work.
Well, at least they're trying to do something, having not for a long time. Now, the King and Queen Consort, they're going to arrive in Germany today. for their first ever state visit. They were due, of course, to be in France, weren't they? But that was cancelled, embarrassingly for Macron, because of those riots which are still gripping the streets over the state pension there.
That's right. So the royal couple will arrive in Berlin before making their way to Brandenburg tomorrow, before ending their engagements in Hamburg on Friday.
Well, we're going to get the latest on the trip with the former royal butler, Grant Harold. Grant, Charles was particularly looking forward to going to France. He's visited it many times privately. He speaks very good French. However, he has to make do with what he has to do with. Germany now the first one.
Absolutely. Good morning. Thank you for having me on. You're right. I mean, this is quite an important visit for him because it's his first overseas state visit as monarch. And, of course, he's been to Germany many times before. But if I can say this is slightly different because going there as a head of state obviously is a bit more pressure and obviously going with the Queen Consort. So it's going to be a very high-profile visit and one that he'll be keen to get right as it is the first visit. And as I mentioned the other week, he will be disappointed that the French visit was cancelled or postponed, I should say. So he will be glad that he's able to at least get this part of the tour underway.
We heard the news yesterday, Grant, about the fact that Prince Harry obviously is in London for this court case against the Daily Mail and other newspapers, and his father isn't going to make time to see him. What do you make of that?
To be honest, I wasn't hugely surprised for two reasons. One is the obvious with everything that's going on. It's a bit tricky at the moment, obviously trying to arrange a visit because the King's obviously not in the country. You know, he's obviously going to be overseas. And he is busy. I mean, I remember working for the family and I know how busy their schedules are. And, you know, they do see each other. I mean, I've kind of heard people say that they don't visit and see each other. They do see each other quite a lot, members of the family. But sometimes it's not always possible. So there is two parts to it. It could be as simple as he's busy and he's obviously undertaking this overseas visit. It could also be that with everything going on at the moment, maybe he feels it's best that they don't actually have any kind of face-to-face time just now, which is the reality of the situation, because it is really tricky, isn't it, with everything that's going on for the family.
We can never quite know what royals think because they don't tell us, but we can assume, can't we, that he was pretty enraged by the revelations in Spare Harry's book, particularly the criticism of his wife, the Queen Consort.
Well, this is what can confuse me because I was lucky enough to be a butler for them during that period, and I saw how well the family got on. They all got on really well, and I was a bit, I was saddened actually when I obviously the comments about I hope I got this quote right, but the kind of wicked stepmother, or this, you know, the reference to the stepmother, because they had a close relationship, and from what I saw, they got on really well. Of course, as you mentioned, even it doesn't matter how close you are as a butler or member of staff, you don't obviously know the inside thoughts. But from what I saw in close proximity of being around them, is that they got on really well. So I was saddened by this, and I don't really know why this has come out. And again, I've always said the whole way along, I don't know what the end game is. I don't know what the plan is at the end of it, because all that's happening is he's damaging the relationship with his father beyond repair. And the more this goes on, the more I really don't see them coming back. I don't see them having the same relationship that they had once before, which was a very close relationship, and the same with his brother.
We were talking a couple of weeks ago, Grant, about whether Prince Harry would arrive in court for this action that he's taking against Associated Newspapers. And Andrew and I joked at the time that he wouldn't be able to resist the temptation of being centre stage again. And sure enough, there he was. Nobody really expected him to arrive, to fly over from America for this court case. How is it going? Do we know how the case is going? Is he going to come out of this well?
Do you know, I wasn't surprised that he did come over, because obviously he feels strongly about this. I mean, the things that are coming out, once again, are not great. I mean, obviously, I think, was it yesterday, the reports about the phone hacking and saying that obviously not everything kind of came out about it. And from what I've read, obviously it's kind of, I suppose part of that blame is on the royal family or the office, I should probably say. And it's difficult because, again, this is bringing them into another kind of argument and debate. And once again, I don't see how this is going to end well. And I just find the whole thing really, really sad. I hate to say it, like everybody, I miss our late Queen, but I am glad that she's not around to see this, because I think this would absolutely break her heart.
Do have to say, Grant, of course, the Associated Newspapers, who I work for, have emphatically denied all the allegations in that court case, and this is a preliminary hearing to establish whether the case even goes ahead. Have you seen the portrait, Grant, of the King, the new portrait? And what do you think?
I have. I actually saw it this morning. I thought, I must say, you know, there's many portraits been done over the years of members of the royal family, and some are excellent, and some they just don't capture the person. But this one really does. I was impressed at this. Now, I've also noticed the bracelet. I don't know if anyone's going to notice the bracelet, which I believe is a nod to climate change, which is something he's very passionate about. And I also thought it was quite interesting seeing him wearing the bracelet, because I don't know if you remember in the years gone by that his sons, in fact, I remember even once giving Prince Harry a bracelet once to wear. So it's quite often you see the younger royals wearing these kind of bracelets, but to see the King wearing it is quite interesting. But as I mentioned, it's significant, especially in this portrait, because it shows a modern King with very clearly saying that he's somebody that supports the climate, what he does for the climate and the climate change.
Sure.
What's his hand doing in his pocket? Don't you want to know that?
I think he looks a bit like Eamon Holmes on that portrait.
Yeah. Why does he have his hand in his pocket?
Do you know,
like
Andrew,
that?
it's interesting. This is a very famous pose of his, isn't it? We all know he does this. And recently, I was speaking to somebody recently, and I ended up doing the same thing. And somebody said, "I think you're around the King too much," because I was copying the same pose. I think it's a natural thing.
Yeah, you shake hands a lot all day. You've got to work out what to do with your other one, haven't you? Grant Harold, former royal butler, thank you so much. You know,
thank you very much.
Lovely to talk to you.
Lovely to talk to you. I wonder whether Charles not seeing Harry this week is a bit of a statement to the British press. The royal family have an interesting, a kind of symbiotic relationship with the British press, don't they? Charles has always resisted taking any newspapers to court over anything.
Yeah, and he's of his mother's persuasion, never complain, never explain. And he would not want a senior member of his family to get involved in a fight. And some of this stuff is going back over 30 years.
And I think this week, with him choosing not to see Harry, I mean, as we say, he's overseas, but choosing not to see him this week when he's in court, I think sends a statement to the British press, which is to say, I'm on your side.
Maybe that's the case. And it is, of course, the week of his first state visit, which is really important. And he's going to Germany on behalf of his government.
Right, next, we're going to have more on the government's controversial plans to rehouse migrants out of hotels, and also reflecting on the life of Paul O'Grady. More of that in the next hour. You're with GB News.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern. A mild but gloomy start across the UK. Some damp weather around, and that will continue into the afternoon, whilst heavier rain develops in places by evening. Our weather kept unsettled at the moment by a large area of low pressure circulating to the west of the UK. That's sending various weather fronts in. We saw one yesterday. We've seen another one arrive overnight. And this is a warm front. It's bringing thicker cloud once again, some low cloud covering the hills and bringing some misty conditions to the coast out towards the west and the south, and some drizzle, especially over Wales, the south of England and parts of Northern Ireland as well as Scotland. The rain tending to be on and off through the day, the driest and brightest weather expected through northern and northeast England, and with some breaks in the cloud for northwest England, North Wales. We could see 16 or 17 Celsius this afternoon. But the cloud and the rain never too far away. In fact, the rain turns heavier and more persistent through Wales into central and southern England during the evening, and then outbreaks of rain or showers affecting western and central Scotland as well as Northern Ireland for a time. Much of that rain moves through overnight to lead to a drier start to Thursday. A mild start to Thursday as well, temperatures of 10 or 11 Celsius in the south, 6 to 10 further north. But it is going to be a grey and gloomy morning once again, especially towards the west and the south. Now, the clouds will tend to lift and break up during the morning and early afternoon, so there'll be some decent sunny spells coming through, and it will feel warm. But as those temperatures rise, we're going to see some further heavy downpours start to develop, with the primary focus for those heavy showers towards the west and the south, and hail and thunder never to be ruled out. Into Friday, well, early Friday at least, a wet and windy system crosses the south of the UK, small risk of disruptive winds associated with that, and there'll continue to be some rain at the weekend.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it. like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories, controversies and issues.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
It's 5 times the opinion, 5 times the debate, and 5 times the fun. The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You could wink at the end. I can't Britain's wink. Listening.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock. Welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner. On today's show.
The government will relocate asylum seekers to ex-military bases and barges in an attempt to end the use of migrant hotels. Other floating accommodation is also reportedly being considered, including disused cruise ships and ferries.
And very worrying in Northern Ireland. The security alert there has been raised for the first time in years because they think there is a possibility of an imminent terrorist threat. The security risk is now severe.
And also, Humza Yousaf will join a formal session to swear him in as Scotland's 6th First Minister within the next few minutes. That ceremony is currently underway. We'll bring you the latest analysis as it happens.
And, of course, tributes have been pouring in. It's so sad, isn't it, to celebrate the lives and times of TV presenter Paul O'Grady. He died overnight, aged just 67. In a statement, his partner, Andre Portasio, said, Paul passed away unexpectedly but peaceful last night.
Let us know what you make of all of our stories this morning and send your reflections and memories of Paul O'Grady. He had an amazing love of dogs, didn't he?
Yeah, he was great. And we're talking to the RSPCA, in fact, about how much work he did with dogs and stray dogs. He was a lovely, lovely man.
Email gbviews@gbnews.uk. First of all, let's get your latest news headlines with Ray Edison.
Good morning, it's 2 minutes past 10. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Thousands of asylum seekers are to be housed in old military bases and on a giant barge in plans due to be announced by the Immigration Minister later on today. The move is the first major step in the government's pledge to end the controversial practice of housing asylum seekers in hotel accommodations. Robert Jenrick will unveil initial proposals to move around 3,000 migrants from hotels into 2 disused RAF bases. GB News understands that the Home Office has already secured the use of the former RAF base at Wethersfield in Essex and RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire. Braintree District Council says it's preparing to apply to the High Court for an interim injunction. Papers are expected to be lodged with the High Court imminently. A new survey has found that public satisfaction with the NHS has dropped to its lowest level since the survey began in 1983. The British Social Attitudes Survey also showed dissatisfaction has doubled in the last 2 years, but 29% of those surveyed still support the service and are satisfied with how it runs. An NHS spokesperson says it's investing up to £14.1 billion in health and social care over the next 2 years to support the workforce and patients. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting told GB News the main issue is staffing.
The NHS has suffered from terrible mismanagement over the course of the last 13 years by the Conservatives that's left the system desperately short of the staff it needs to get patients seen on time. That's led to the highest waiting lists in the history of the NHS and the lowest patient satisfaction ever. And what I hear commonly from patients, and I experienced this a bit myself with my experience with kidney cancer a couple of years ago, people could not be more praising of NHS staff. They think they're doing a brilliant job, but there simply aren't enough of them.
Humza Yousaf will be sworn in as Scotland's 6th First Minister later on today. The ceremony will see the 37-year-old make his statutory declarations. After that, he'll be granted his official title of First Minister and Keeper of the Scottish Seal. Mr Yousaf has made history by being both the youngest person in the role and the first from an ethnic minority. Diesel is being sold for around 17 pence a litre more on average than petrol, despite wholesale prices for both fuels being virtually identical. The RAC has found that the average price of a litre of petrol across the United Kingdom is 146.6 pence, whilst diesel is 164.2 pence. An RAC spokesperson says wholesale diesel was only 6 pence more expensive than petrol at the start of this month. Mourners will gather later for Baroness Betty Boothroyd's funeral. The former Labour MP died last month, aged 93. She was the first and only woman so far to be elected Speaker of the House of Commons. Both Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer are expected to attend the service in Cambridgeshire. The King and Queen Consort will arrive in Germany for their state visit this afternoon. They're both expected to receive military honours at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, followed by a state banquet hosted by Germany's president in the evening. It's Charles and Camilla's first foreign visit as heads of the royal family, but the King's 29th trip to Germany. The pair were previously scheduled to visit France this week, but the trip was postponed due to nationwide protests over pension reform. The Queen Consort is said to be deeply saddened at the death of TV presenter Paul O'Grady, who died last night, aged 67. She says his warm heart and infectious humour lit up the lives of so many. His partner, Andre Portasio, said he died unexpectedly but peacefully. Presenter Lorraine Kelly has described him as a really special man, whilst Vernon Kay said he was always a joy to be around. Broadcaster Pete Price was a friend. He says he changed television.
What I loved about him was he also was very shrewd. He knew when to hang up the frock for Lily Savage. He knew exactly what direction he was going with in his career. But we must never forget also, he totally changed tea time television. He was getting 4 or 5 million people watching his chat show. Nobody'd ever done that. He brought out amazing new audiences to television.
And UK scientists have discovered an ultra-massive black hole around 33 billion times the mass of the Sun. Astronomers at Durham University say the extremely exciting galactic discovery is one of the biggest ever found. The origins of black holes, the most massive objects in the universe, is still unclear. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. So let's get back to Andrew and Bev.
We just want to bring some of your views this morning about Paul O'Grady, who very sadly died in the night. Anna has said, so very sad this morning. Paul was a terrific human being who was the best carer his lovely animals and pets could have. I feel sorry for them, but would imagine Paul set something in motion in the event of his death. God bless him. And Carla says, as a gay person, he brought us to the masses and paved the way for so many gay comedians. I share his loves of dogs and rescues. R.I.P. Paul, your beautiful soul, and thank you. Yeah, and Linda says, absolutely gutted. We've lost this wonderful person. I loved Paul and his great sense of humour and compassion for animals. He will be greatly missed. So sad. He was one of those people, you know, Bev, in the industry that just had no enemies. Absolutely. He was just so popular and so well-liked, and he made that extraordinary transition from bitchy drag acts, Lily Savage, who in my misspent youth in the 90s, I used to go and see him, and he was brilliant, and anybody who tried to take him on from the floor while he was on the stage, good luck with that. Brilliant. Razor sharp. And then he became a household name. Yeah. I think he is a national treasure, actually. I mean, he said, definitely, he said it was kind of shocking to go from being a drag act. So he said, next thing, I'm on Saturday night doing blankety blank. Yeah. But he was fearless, wasn't he? He didn't care what anybody thought about him. And he was so authentic, it was... You used to see him a lot with Cilla Black. They were inseparable. Yeah. They were like Darby and Joan. They used to go on holidays together. And I know he was devastated when she died. She died far too young too, of course. He, when my then husband had an accident in America, and it was in the papers, and I was over in the hotel in America. We were there for about 6 weeks, and Paul O'Grady sent a card out there, and I remember him signing it, and he did 2 little doggy footprints at the bottom of it. But I know. And of course, we are talking to the RSPCA in the programme because he really did make a major difference to rehousing strays, dogs and cats. And of course, when they got to Battersea Dog Centre, they virtually had to lock the dogs up because he always wanted to leave with one. Right, very sad news. We're going to be talking about that as well with our paper's guest in just a moment. Now, the government will announce today that thousands of migrants will be relocated from hotels to be housed on former military bases and on barges. And not before time, can I say. Now, our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has been to one of those military bases in Essex, which could house up to 2,000 asylum seekers.
High above this Essex airbase, it's easy to see why the Home Office would view this facility as an attractive option to house asylum seekers. Across the site are multiple disused buildings, former residential blocks, which could easily be adapted to accommodate migrants. But right next to the Wethersfield airbase is the village it took its name from. A quiet community now united in opposition to such a large-scale accommodation centre right on their doorstep.
At the moment, what we're expecting is from the 1st of April, the Home Office will take charge of the site.
Tony Clark-Holland, a leading voice in the campaign against the plans, says the communities around this base would be overwhelmed by such a large accommodation centre.
Some people are worried about voicing that concern because suddenly they're deemed to be racist, and that is not the case. If it was any group of young males, anywhere, people could feel concerned. The strain that would put on the local communities and local services, there's no facilities here. Obviously, if they needed anything, whether it's medical, emergency, we're just miles from anywhere.
At the weekend, more than 250 people from here in Wethersfield and surrounding communities gathered in the village hall to express those concerns. The local council revealed it plans to seek a High Court injunction to halt any attempt to use the base for asylum seekers.
Perfect. £8.63, please.
This tiny shop, come occasional post office, is the only store in Wethersfield. The owner says the lack of any engagement from the Home Office is simply fueling their concerns.
If it's a detention centre, that's no good, surely, for people who are unfamiliar with the area, being cooped up in one small space. But then if they are allowed to roam free, then again, it's another concern. So we're not saying we don't want them, it's just the fact of it's not the right place to have them in a very secluded village.
This is a familiar pattern. Locals battling Home Office plans to house large-scale asylum accommodation centres in their communities. The vast majority of these campaigns have been successful, but for the government, every victory leaves them with a diminishing number of suitable sites. The Prime Minister has promised to end the controversial use of hotels to house asylum seekers. Larger scale accommodation centres on government-owned sites might seem like a logical move, but not to those who live right next to these planned facilities. Mark White, GB News, Wethersfield in Essex.
Well, Mark, there's a pretty high-profile opponent of the idea of moving it. I thought we'd got Mark with us. No, we haven't. We're going to go to Darren McCaffrey, who is our political editor. Darren, from that package from Mark White, there's a rather high-profile opponent to that plan to move asylum seekers to that base in Essex, the local MP who just happens to be the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly. That's not a very good example, is it, to set to the rest of the country?
Yeah, very good morning, Andrew. Hopefully I'll be a good enough replacement for Mark. You're right in saying that James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, is not in favour of these plans, and that's kind of part of the government's problem in all of this, is in effect NIMBYism, whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing. And when local communities object, when local MPs object, it means that the government's got fewer and fewer options to look at. Now, what we're expecting later on today is essentially the government kind of reheating ideas that we've heard time and time again, not least of all from this very government. In fact, I think the front pages of the papers, you could have picked them up in December or November of last year and you would have seen very similar headlines. It does look like the government is going to go ahead with this idea of moving some refugees onto military sites across the country, disused military sites. Though this idea of using barges or ships seems a hell of a lot more vague. Dominic Raab, the Deputy Prime Minister, who's actually doing PMQs a little later on today here at Westminster, was unable to say precisely how many barges, where they would be, when this might start, how many asylum seekers they might hold. I think it's much more of an idea, i.e. they're not ruling it out, rather than anything that's looking practically possible at the moment. Though it must be said, Scotland has housed, I think, around 1,700 refugees on a cruise ship over the last 6 months or so. But yeah, this is politically difficult for the government. They point out on one hand that the current system is not, Andrew, sustainable. It's costing around 6 to 7 million quid a day, £150 on average for hotel rooms. Clearly that's also causing disquiet in different parts of the country, while at the same time trying to find alternatives clearly is not proving easy, not least of all, as you've rightly pointed out, when members of the cabinet seem to be opposing it, at least in their own area.
Obviously, we've said this morning the devil will be in the detail to some extent, but can you clarify, do we know if those people who are currently in hotels will be moved into this new accommodation, or is this extra capacity?
So, at the moment, we don't know the detail of that. I would have thought the idea is to move people who are in existing places into these kind of either barges or onto these military sites. But you're also right in suggesting this is about creating capacity, because there is no sense that the smallpox crisis is going to come to an end anytime soon. Now, the reason I say that is because the Prime Minister yesterday suggested these flights to Rwanda, these much, again, mooted flights to Rwanda, are not likely to take place before the summer, even though that's what Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, had suggested. And so in those circumstances, if the numbers keep at similar levels or even higher than we saw last year at around just below 50,000, clearly the system will need more capacity, Bev. And that, again, is not least of all because the government are terribly bad at processing claims. People arrive in this country seeking asylum, for good or for ill, and yet their claims are not dealt with within weeks or months. It takes years, and that is why they end up clogging up at the system. So in the end, as I say, the government are boxed in by not having much choice about where to house asylum seekers, and at the moment, frankly, do not, at least in the short term, of any way of preventing them from coming here. And even when they are here, they've seemingly got no quick way of solving whether they've got legitimate asylum claims or not.
Thank you, Darren. Darren McCaffrey there, down at Westminster. You just hope that once people are in these facilities, they can be processed more quickly.
God,
we really need.
Which should not be taking 2 years, it should be taking 2 days.
Absolutely. So, this morning we've been talking about the tributes that have been pouring in for the legendary TV presenter and entertainment Paul O'Grady, who has died aged 67.
And the Queen Consort, of all people, says she's deeply saddened in a statement at the death of O'Grady, who she says warm heart and infectious humour lit up the lives of so many.
So during his career, the entertainer was known for his drag persona, Lily Savage, as well as hosting the Paul O'Grady Show, Blind Date and Blankety Blank, for which he won numerous accolades, including a TV BAFTA and a National Television Award.
Let's speak, though, because, of course, he was very well known for all the work he did with dogs and that lovely TV programme, Stray Dogs, to the head of public affairs at the RSPCA, David Bowles. David, that dog programme, it was compelling television. Even if you didn't like dogs, there was something about the way Paul O'Grady related and reacted to dogs. And every time he went to Battersea Dogs Home, they virtually had to search him because he wanted to leave with 3 strays every time he left.
Yeah, he was a natural, and his enthusiasm for animals and particularly dogs came over. That natural infectious enthusiasm and support for the animals that he was looking after. You could tell that he cared about them. What many people don't know is that the programme, which started in 2012, was very, very successful. It ran for 7 series, and there was probably another series which was in the planning. He won an RSPCA Animal Heroes Award in 2016 because of his love for animals. And it didn't just extend to dogs. So, for instance, Paul had a small holding, and he rehomed a lamb which somebody had abandoned in a waste paper bin. And we went to him and said, we don't really know what to do with this lamb. And he said, don't worry, I'll take it. I'll put it on my small holding. And it had a fantastic life after that. So yes, he was really empathetic about all animals, but particularly dogs through his TV series.
And that programme For the Love of Dogs was really important, wasn't it, for making people aware about that old cliche, a dog isn't just for Christmas, and making people aware of just how difficult and complicated it can be to look after a dog.
Absolutely, and what also it was really about was about rescue dogs that are taken in by organisations like Battersea, like the RSPCA, because people don't want them. They may be moggies, they may be hybrids, they're not specific breeds. But their needs are exactly the same as other dogs. And he made it fashionable to want a rescue dog rather than go for a specific breed. And I think that was really important because before then, people had assumed that if a dog ended up in places like the RSPCA or Battersea, that it was second class. And he showed that they weren't indeed second class. They were, if anything, better than a real breed dog. And he made it fashionable again to go to centres and get rescue dogs from the RSPCA and from Battersea. And we will be entirely within his debt for doing that and making that really important point.
David, it's quite common for celebrities, people as famous as Paul O'Grady, to use their charity connections as a bit of a badge-slapping exercise. Their heart isn't really in it, but it looks good for them. He was the polar opposite of that, wasn't he? And I imagine he must have been a joy to work with.
He was completely the polar opposite, and you could tell that from the way that he did his TV programmes. It wasn't just him going through the motions. He actually really did love those animals, and you joked at the beginning that they had to sometimes lock up the dogs at Battersea because he would go round and go, oh, I might take one of those home. So that you can't put that infectious enthusiasm for animals on. It showed completely through his character. It was something there that was natural, and I think that infectious enthusiasm spread to the viewers and to the public, and that's the reason why the TV programme For the Love of Dogs was so popular, why it ran for 7 series, why it regularly brought in 4 or 5 million people, and why it won TV awards. You know, it won 3 national TV awards, and it beat other programmes such as Gogglebox sometimes, which shows you can only get that through that natural enthusiasm.
We've been showing quite a lot of photographs, David, with the Paul O'Grady with the Queen Consort, Camilla, who is also, of course, a great dog lover and is associated with a number of dog charities. It's fascinating that she's put out a public statement saying how sad she is too, that his premature loss.
Yeah, and she is also has been to Battersea many times. She's opened up different parts of Battersea, their new centres there. She's also a patron for the Brook Hospital because she loves horses, as everybody knows so much. So yes, that connection there of animals between Paul O'Grady and the Queen Consort is obviously a massive connection. And I think they bonded through their real love and infectious love of animals. And she could see in him a real compatriot of somebody that really cared for animals and really wanted to improve their welfare. And I think he did a fantastic job to put out those messages to the public about, particularly, if you want to get a dog, know what you're doing, have the responsibility to feed it, to give it the right exercise, the right environment. And I think a lot of dogs owe their better conditions to his programme and his infectious love for animals.
Thank you, David. David Bowles there, Head of Public Affairs at the RSPCA. Thank you so much. I didn't realise that Savage was his mother's maiden name.
Yeah.
And also that he was married.
He was. He had a wife.
He had
Female.
a wife.
Long time ago.
Yeah. They had a daughter and he has a grandson. Born in 2006.
And was a devoted grandpa.
And a granddaughter in 2009.
Yeah, devoted grandpa.
Yeah, our thoughts with all of them.
The many sides of Paul O'Grady, who we sadly died overnight. He was just 67.
Yeah,
so,
should have had
so
20 more years of good work, shouldn't he?
Great company, and if ever you saw him, the smile was so genuine.
I didn't realise he's actually been on stage as well. He was playing Miss Hannigan in the musical Annie. And he wrote
right
on Instagram just saying, thoroughly enjoying what I'm doing.
Devastating for the cast because, of course, Miss Hannigan, rather big part of the show. Still to come, we'll be heading over to Israel because there's some extraordinary civil unrest in that country. Pretty unusual for Israel. This is To The Point on GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
You're with To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, US President Joe Biden has urged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to abandon his controversial judicial overhauls.
Now, these proposals have led unusually to massive street protests in Israel, prompting the Israeli Prime Minister to say in response to Biden he does not respond to pressure from abroad. Joining us now is the constitutional law lecturer at Reichman University in Tel Aviv, Adam Shinar. Have I pronounced your surname correctly?
That's perfect.
Great. I'm correct, right, aren't I? Highly unusual to have days of intense street protests in Israel, in Tel Aviv.
Yes, well, Israel has had many, many protests in the past, but what we're seeing now is not just their intensity, is that their duration. Actually, these protests started over 12 weeks ago when the government announced its plans to what they call is reforming the judiciary, but really it's politicizing the judiciary and limiting the court's power of judicial review of legislation. And for 12 straight weeks, hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets, pretty much actually closed down the streets and important highways protesting these plans. And what we're seeing in the past few days is really the peak of that activity, that intense activity.
What exactly is it that they are protesting about?
Well, it started out as a protesting against these reforms, about these judicial reforms that are politicizing the way judges are appointed and limiting the court's power to strike down legislation. And basically what people saw these reforms as doing as concentrating almost all political power in the government, which already controls the parliament. And their immediate concern was that there were not going to be any meaningful checks on government power. That was the beginning of these protests. And that was, I guess, maybe for the first month or two. But these protests have really transformed or evolved. It's no longer just about these judicial reforms. For the protesters, what they see is this is a battle over Israel's nature, over Israel's character, over Israel's future, over its liberal credentials. Can Israel still be a liberal country? So the reforms are simply the trigger for a much broader debate about Israel's future as a liberal country, and the protesters are squarely within the liberal camp, and they're concerned that Israel will be turning into an illiberal country in the style of Poland, in the style of Hungary, for example.
So, for instance, if your judicial review process is the same as it is here, this is one of the few, in fact, the only way in which government decisions can be questioned in a court. You know, people can't routinely take the government to court, can they, by the decision that they make, otherwise nothing would get done. But what we have is a judicial review. And I think what you're telling me, therefore, is that in Israel, that process is going to be, what, watered down or stopped completely?
Well, it's not going to be stopped completely, but it's going to be watered down. That it would, I'm not saying it would be meaningless, but it would be significantly watered down. Now, there's a distinction here. In the UK, there is judicial review of administrative decisions, but there is no judicial review of legislation. So the most that the British court can say is issue a declaration of incompatibility. But in Israel, the court has been exercising judicial review over legislation for the past 30 years. And basically striking down laws that are in conflict with certain constitutional rights, more like the US model. That part will be watered down so much that it will almost have no effect. So it's really taking back the country from having 30 years of constitutional protections to having virtually no constitutional protections whatsoever.
How well does somebody like Benjamin Netanyahu, a very long-serving Israeli Prime Minister, react to the idea that the President of the United States interferes, wags his finger and tells him he's getting it all wrong?
Well, Israel and the U.S. have a very special and long-standing relationship, and it's really hard to say or think or believe that the U.S. has never intervened. The U.S. always has intervened to an extent, whether formally or informally. But the problem Netanyahu is having now, he has an external problem with the US, but he also has an internal problem inside his government because Netanyahu doesn't really have a lot of options. Netanyahu cannot form an alternative government because the opposition parties will not go with him because, as you probably know, he's been indicted for corruption charges and he's currently standing trial in court. And he has a coalition that is composed of ultra-Orthodox and religious Zionists and very right-wing and conservative members who are also limiting what he can do. So he's really, caught between a rock and a hard place here, that in order for him to stay in power, and he wants to stay in power, he has to abide by what his partners want. At the same time, he has to appease the president, so it's really not clear what he's going to do. I mean, I think he even doesn't know what he's going to do.
Fascinating, Adam. Thank you so much for illuminating that particular discussion. Adam Shinar there, from Tel Aviv. It is interesting, isn't it? And you see that, like you say, the Israeli people clearly feel so strongly about something which is a constitutional issue.
And they were on the verge of a general strike.
Yeah.
Which would have been unprecedented in Israel, but he's now saying he might pause these reforms. But 12 weeks of and then, of course, go across the channel in France, they're still writing.
Yeah, good for them. Right.
It's not so bad in Britain after all, is it?
Maybe we should be doing a bit more of that.
Maybe.
Right, still to come. I'm not inciting.
No.
We investigate how local high street businesses are using social media to try to bring customers back into their shops. What does your high street look like? That's all after your morning's news.
33 minutes past 10, I'm Ray Addison, here's the latest. Thousands of asylum seekers will be housed in old military bases and on a giant barge in plans due to be announced by the Immigration Minister later on today. It's the first major step in the government's pledge to end the controversial practice of housing asylum seekers in hotels. Robert Jenrick will unveil initial proposals to move around 3,000 migrants into 2 disused RAF bases. GB News understands that the Home Office has already secured the use of 2 former bases in Essex and Lincolnshire. However, it will face legal challenges. A new survey has found public satisfaction with the NHS has dropped to its lowest level since the survey began in 1983. The British Social Attitudes Survey also showed dissatisfaction has doubled in the last 2 years. Only 29% of people surveyed are satisfied with how it runs. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting told us the main issue is staffing.
The NHS has suffered from terrible mismanagement over the course of the last 13 years by the Conservatives that's left the system desperately short of the staff it needs to get patients seen on time. That's led to the highest waiting lists in the history of the NHS and the lowest patient satisfaction ever. And what I hear commonly from patients, and I experienced this a bit myself with my experience with kidney cancer a couple of years ago, people could not be more praising of NHS staff. They think they're doing a brilliant job, but there simply aren't enough of them.
And the King and Queen Consort will arrive in Germany for their state visit this afternoon. They're both expected to receive military honours at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. That'll be followed by a state banquet hosted by Germany's president. It's Charles and Camilla's first foreign visit as heads of the royal family, but the King's 29th trip to Germany. We're on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn too. This is GB News. Andrew and Bev are coming right back.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. It's 10:38. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
And an experiment backed by the government's Community Renewal Fund has shown how businesses can actually use social media to bring customers back into the ailing high street.
Let's hope so. Well, during a 6-month period, almost 2,000 businesses in Herefordshire took part in an attempt to save their high street. Our national reporter, Theo Chicumba, has the story.
As the increase in the cost of living and flexible working continues, less people are visiting their high streets. Businesses like the Ledbury in Herefordshire are attempting to use social media to bring customers in. But is it working?
It's absolutely helped us, and I think the opportunities for small business, especially on social media, Instagram, Facebook, all of them really, is endless. If you are confident and have the knowledge and know-how, which maybe have given us, to explore all the different services they have to offer and to reach the maximum audience.
Whether you want a drink or something new to wear, you can find it here under one roof. They are one of more than 1,700 businesses in the county who took part in a government-funded social media pilot. During that time, businesses taking part had a 15% increase in footfall, whereas those who didn't take part had 7.4%. Social media specialists argue more companies need to invest in their online presence.
Only 400 businesses post something on a daily basis on social media. It's a challenging market, right? So you've got to really look to be able to expand your business today. I think there's a big misunderstanding that social media is sometimes seen as a digital channel. But actually, as consumers, we've got a phone in our hand all the time, and it's what you see on your feed determines what you do.
Could this shake-up in approach be the answer?
We have quite a big following that we're trying to grow, and part of a service that maybe offers is to grow an audience that reflect other people who have been interested and enjoy the business. So that way we get to kind of maximise our reach and let everyone know what we're doing, and that we'd love to welcome them to the Ledbury.
And it's that strategy many in this area are taking on in order to drive footfall from online into physical stores, as increasing footfall in high streets remains a challenge for businesses across the country. Theo Chicumba, GB News.
It's interesting, isn't it? Do you buy much online?
No.
Do you not?
I don't. I can't stand it. It drives me nuts.
Mike,
drives me nuts.
Mike Parry and Amanda Patella here. You can hear us nattering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you buy anything in the shops anymore? I
Yeah,
try
I
to,
buy
and they
everything in
never have
shops.
any
Me
stock.
too. Yeah, the only time I stand away for something online is if you're looking through the paper. Oh, look at this, a blazer for £35.
Yeah.
And when it arrives, it is so creased, you never get the creases out of it. You never wear it. I'll throw it away.
That's you buying trendy linen.
Yes, that's
What about you,
absolutely
Amanda?
right.
Do you like to try things on in the shop? Or...
Bev, I'm a kind of vintage person. This jacket is Amanda Wakely, 25 years ago.
Well, it looks good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wear, I really like recycling all my clothes.
Yeah, I think it looks
I'm not
great.
an eco-warrior or anything, but I just like old stuff.
But I like shops. I like big shops.
Me too.
I do.
I mean, every
you're
Christmas.
insane.
Every Christmas.
I hyperventilate if I have to go into a department store.
I'm so happy
I have a
John
panic
Lewis.
attack.
So much.
But John
Every
Lewis makes
Christmas,
me
on the
happy.
15th of December, I go into Debenhams and I buy every single Christmas present on 4 floors.
You're a very sad person.
I don't know what I'm going to buy when I go in. I just spot things and buy them and take them to the
I'm
car.
a John Lewis man.
Oh,
Yeah,
well,
my
I'm
problem is
Debenhams.
I don't have the time necessarily to go to the shops. I buy it online, nothing fits, and then it sits in a massive pile, and it
Yeah.
takes me 6 months to send
Yeah.
it back.
Yeah.
It drives me mad.
And then you can't get the refund.
Exactly, and you have to get a credit. Anyway, long story. Right, we're going to talk about the very sad news this morning, aren't we? That Paul O'Grady has died, aged 67. If you're just joining us, that is the breaking news this morning. Really sad, Amanda. You must have met Paul O'Grady, did you?
I have met him several times out at the Battersea Dogs Home. And excuse me here, but I felt so upset this morning. I felt like one of my best friends had died because he'd been so much a part of our firmament for so long. And Andrew, I thought about you because the viewers might not know, but you're my best friend. And, you know, the story that, you know, when my brother Michael died, Mum always said that God sent me Andrew because we met just after Michael died. So he's my best friend in the whole world. And I suddenly was thinking, oh, my God, let me die before Andrew. What am I thinking of?
No, you can't do that. You can't do that.
But I just think he resonates so much.
He does.
And although I did think he didn't look very well in the last For the Love of Dogs show, he really... But we feel like we've lost someone.
He'd had a couple of heart attacks, hadn't he? And this was the third one. So when you met him at Battersea Dogs Home, did you have to wrestle him to the floor as you tried to take another dog home with him?
He was always trying to do that, but I was picking up Ted, my little kitten.
Yeah.
So because, of course, Battersea Dogs Home also has rescue cats.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
Mike, Paul O'Grady was from your neck of the woods.
Well, he was from my mum and dad's neck of the woods. And do you know what? You can tell when somebody comes from what we call it across the water. They're not a Scouse, they're not Liverpool, they're from Birkenhead, OK?
Right.
And they've got that half Scouse accent. So it's not like Wayne Rooney, you know, what you want, lad, you know, come round here from Kirby. They are much more refined in a way. It's a sort of refined Scouse accent. Come from where my mum and dad came from, Prenton in Birkenhead, near Tranmere Rovers ground, OK. But the other connection I've got with Paul O'Grady, I never met him, right? But I've been treated for the last 20 years for dilated cardiomyopathy, OK? I'm still an outpatient at Harefield Hospital. I waited for 7 months for a heart transplant at Harefield before I signed myself out because I couldn't wait any longer. My life was disappearing. And the doctors said to me, more or less, on your head be it. It could happen any day. And people with heart conditions, generally speaking, are walking time bombs, you know?
Have you had the heart transplant?
No, I never had it. It was 20 years ago. I've never had it. 3 years after 3 years after I came out of Harefield saying, I've got to get on with my life, I did the Great Northern Run.
Good for you.
The half marathon. So it was really mind over matter. Get myself, well, that's the way you've got to be when you've got a heart condition. You've got to believe it's going to keep going and it's going to get you through the day, you know?
Now, Queen Consort, she put out a very nice statement this morning.
Beautiful.
Now, of course, Amanda, you were supposed to meet the Queen Consort before she was Queen
Lord
Consort
alive. Why are you
at that
dragging this
lovely charity, the Medical Detection Dogs, where we're both ambassadors. This is a charity, Mike, and Bev, where these dogs can literally smell cancer like that.
Unbelievable.
It's an extraordinary
Unbelievable
charity.
to see a dog yapping like that.
Camilla's the patron.
Can I tell this story?
You
So
can.
Andrew says, you're going to get to meet Camilla for the first time. I'm truly excited. He says, we're going to meet at Euston Station. The train wasn't going from Euston. It was going from some other station completely. We arrived there and there are people still painting parts of the building. And I said, they're leaving that a bit late, considering she's coming here today. And I said
in an hour's time.
I said to him, before we set off, I said, I've got bad juju about this day. Something's going to go wrong. He said, you don't be ridiculous. We get there, we walk in, they have a heart attack at reception seeing him, and they say, it's not until tomorrow.
Oh, no.
That went down well. Just as well, we're very good friends. And we'd had to get a train right out to Milton Keynes, and we had to get a taxi, and then we couldn't get a taxi back.
Andrew, that was a nightmare.
I know.
But I did get to meet those beautiful dogs.
You did.
And Camilla's a great support.
And you didn't go back the next day?
No, because she was busy.
I was working
But the next day, Camilla was fabulous, and she came in and she...
Yada, yada,
she loves dogs, and that's why she had that great rapport with Paul O'Grady. They met a lot. And they talked about dogs a lot. I mean, Camilla used to have loads of dogs at her house in Wiltshire, and she's been a great patron for that charity, which is a hugely important charity.
It is important, and I just feel, I think, like a lot of people today, waking up to that news, You just feel like you've lost a friend.
Yeah, I agree. Also,
I think, you know,
67.
67.
Very young, younger than me, actually. But also, his endearing friendship with Cilla Black also resonated in our part of the world. You know what I mean? Everybody loves Cilla Black.
Yeah.
She was the young girl who came out of the cavern with the Beatles, and so it was brilliant to see these two megastars working together, you know?
I often used to meet them at do's together.
Right.
And they were inseparable. They were like Darby and Joan.
Like you and me.
Like you and me.
Like you and me.
Just like you and me. They go on holiday together, as do Amanda and I.
Yes.
And they talk the same.
Yes.
And they were inseparable. You wouldn't be able to put a piece of paper between
Indeed.
them. And he was devastated
when
she
know.
died.
I know. When she died on holiday, didn't she? And fell over.
She was in her home in Spain.
That's right. Yeah, fell over. Yeah.
Just to read another, his state manager, Malcolm Prince, made this statement. He said, yesterday afternoon, I popped round to pause for a good old catch-up.
Yeah.
Surrounded by his beloved dogs, he was laughing, smiling and full of life. He was so proud of Annie, which was the play that he was in, and so happy to be back on Boom Radio, and he was looking forward to so many projects, and now he's gone. I can't believe it. We've lost a unique talent.
Isn't that?
And I've lost a dear friend. We were all lucky to have Paul in our lives.
And shame on radio too, because they made his life a misery at the end, didn't they?
Well, they've made a lot of people's lives a misery, haven't they? For
like Ken
no
Bruce,
reason.
all these veterans.
No
and
reason.
Of course, he'd been doing a really popular show. They insisted he had to have someone aged 19 or something on the road so they could get to the holy grail of youth. And he left.
Yeah, but what a fantastic body of work.
Yeah.
And we felt like he was our friend. That is, I mean,
agree.
to be loved by strangers is a really great gift.
Yeah. I remember meeting first as Lily Savage.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
in a gay club in London in the 1990s, and I can still see the poor guy in the audience decided to have a take on Lily Savage.
Yeah.
Not good.
No,
Flattened
sure.
with a whip of that razor-sharp tongue.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And what courage she had to have established such a powerful character as, you know, as Lily Savage, and then decide to take that off and start again doing something else. Isn't that brave in the world of showbiz?
Actually, isn't it?
Incredibly brave to say, I'll create a new persona, you know.
Underestimate
Peter Tatchell told a great story on Breakfast this morning. He said that Paul O'Grady was in the Vauxhall Tavern, a very famous gay pub in South London. He was in his dressing room when the police raided, as usual. We used to get a very tough time from the police in the 1980s. It was at the time of the AIDS scare, and the police arrived with their rubber gloves on. He said, "Oh, hello, officers, you come to help with the washing up." Couldn't make it up.
Marigolds.
Marigolds, pink ones, obviously.
Right, shall we move on to our second biggest story of the day? This is about migrants and plans to house them on giant barges and 2 military bases rather than the hotels. What do you make of this, Mike?
Well, as usual, and you know, this plan's only been unveiled in the last few hours, so to speak. As usual, those who are criticising don't have an option, do they?
That's right.
You know, they don't have an alternative.
No.
So what are you going to do? I have to say, I'm getting more impressed with Rishi Sunak and his status as Prime Minister. You know, when he gave those 5 pledges, we all thought, well, that's like Ed Miliband's wall, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's going to come to nothing. And yet he's working through them. And he seems to be coming up with, if not answers, then solutions, providing we all put our shoulders to the wheel and try and get these over the line. But again, as I say, with the immigrant crisis that we've got, some people call them refugees. I call them illegal immigrants because they come into this country illegally. Yeah. If you don't do anything to deter people, then you will have them coming and coming and coming. And also, the doubters will not accept that the illegal movement of people around the world is worth £7 billion a year. It is a massive criminal industry. So where would we sit back and allow any other massive criminal industry to just keep taking place without the civilised world trying to do something about it and save people's lives?
And these hotels, Amanda, 400 of them are completely overflowing with these migrants who can then just disappear in the middle of the night.
Look, the system isn't working.
No.
I felt rather disappointed when I heard Dominic Raab on the radio this morning.
The Justice Secretary.
The Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister. He's still there, isn't he?
Yes.
And he was asked by our friend Nick Ferrari, how many boats do you have available to put these people into? He didn't have a clue. And he said, but you were at Cabinet yesterday and it was discussed and you were releasing this. Does not have a clue. I worry about Rishi Sunak. I'm not a fan. I think that he's just almost like confetti chucking out all of these headline-grabbing initiatives. They haven't done the work. And the only way... I'm an Australian. We had a terrible problem with illegal immigration.
And push them back.
The only way you stop it is if... I hate this narrative about you've got to stop the gangs, the illegal gangs. you've got to stop the people who want to come.
That's right.
You've got to make it so unattractive to come here illegally, and yet in Australia, on the other side of that, they have one of the highest rates of legal migration. So they say their policy is, if you want to come to our country, knock on the front door, don't sneak around the back because we'll send you away.
And
that's what we've got to do, deterrence. And I just think that this is all over the place. They don't even have a clue if they've got any boats.
They literally, though, the Australian government turned the boats back.
They did turn the boats back.
pushed them back,
and it was a much bigger bit of water between where they were coming from than it is from France.
And stop the boats, which they keep using, the Tories, that phrase, was, of course, the election slogan of Tony Abbott in 2013, and it helped him win a big election victory.
And it worked. But I don't think they've done the hard work.
I think, Amanda, you made such a very good point about how do you make the country less attractive to come to. People always say to me, well, America built itself on immigration. But anybody who went to America was told you can come and live here, but you get literally no help from the state. To the extent that when you went through Ellis Island, if you were examined and found to have any physical or mental disabilities, you were not allowed to enter the United States because you became a burden on their society. You had to stand on your own 2 feet and get on with it. And I know exactly what you're saying, Amanda. This is an attractive country to come to because we're the most civilised country in the world, and people have nothing to fear by coming here.
And I love it, but I came here legally.
Yeah.
You did?
I came on a boat, but it was, just...
With your backpack?
With my backpack and my husband. Who,
What happened to him? Where's he gone?
My husband, the backpack lasted longer than the husband. But we're not going into that. I don't talk about my personal life on television.
No.
He was a cad.
What I'd love to see the figures behind this project, though, because pictures are starting to sort of emerge now online of what some of this accommodation might look like.
Yeah.
And it's pretty luxurious.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it's luxurious, because if you had a one-bedroom flat with its own bathroom and all that, I think, from what I've read, there'll be 4 people in a room, there'll be shared bathrooms and all that.
That's all right.
Well, exactly, but I mean, it's not exactly luxurious. But
when I first went to work and I lived in a bedsit, I shared a bathroom with 9 different flats.
Well, yeah, I agree, but that was many years ago, without being too...
That's rude.
No, I didn't mean you like. But I've seen pictures and details. Did anybody see a TV series called The Rig, which was about the North Sea oil rig and all that?
Yeah.
That was exactly the same thing. The people were living there. And, to the extent where it said that some of them can be quite luxurious. Games rooms and cinemas and all that kind of stuff. Gyms and all that kind of stuff. What I'm saying is that I don't think it's a bad option compared to the price we're paying for hotel rooms at 400 different hotels.
Maybe we should put them on some of these disused oil rigs, because there'll be a lot more now the SMP of that guy's won that SMP election.
They're disused submarines.
Submarines?
Yeah, because we've got lots of them that aren't being used anymore.
Yeah, well...
And where would the submarines...
Bit of a deterrent.
Well, there's lots of Ministry of Defence boats and things which aren't being used.
Well, there are, and there's lots of Ministry of Defence sites, including RAF Scampton, of course, which people are getting all upset about, aren't they?
It was the Dam Busters.
It was the Dam Busters squadron. And there's another one, I think, down in Kent, isn't there, which are going up at the moment.
And there's one in the Foreign Secretary's constituency.
Exactly.
To take 2,000 people. And guess what? The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, says, not in my backyard.
He doesn't want it, that's right, yeah.
Okay. Thank you both, Amanda and Mike. Now, next we're going to have more on the government's controversial plans to rehouse migrants. We've just been talking about that. You are with GB News.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. Tomorrow should be brighter, but for most today's a fairly drab affair. It will get a bit brighter this afternoon across parts of Northern Ireland. It's fairly breezy, and the outbreaks of rain being caused by this area of low pressure, which is throwing weather fronts up across the UK. As this cold front clears, as I mentioned, Northern Ireland will turn brighter before sunsets, but elsewhere, say, a lot of cloud round, outbreaks of rain, heavy at times over southwest Scotland, spreading into Wales, western parts of England. Something a bit brighter too at times to the east of the Pennines and maybe across the southeast, but most fairly glum, heaviest rain in the west. It's pretty mild, temperatures getting into the teens, maybe 15 or 16 with a bit of brightness here and there, but it is also fairly breezy. The breezy and wet weather will push into northeast England and eastern Scotland this evening. Another zone of rain then develops in the southwest. That spreads across parts of Wales out towards the Midlands and eastern England through the night. Turning a little drier across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some clearer spells likely here, but isn't going to be a cold one. Temperatures at many places staying in the high single figures, double digits across most towns and cities for England and Wales. We start Thursday then with a lot of cloud and still some outbreaks of rain over the east, but that should clear away. And generally speaking, a much brighter day tomorrow. I think we'll see some good breaks in the clouds, some sunny spells. There will be showers. It's far from a completely dry day. The showers tending to move through on that brisk breeze. But when the sun's out, temperatures a little higher than today's, 16, 17 degrees likely in a few places. But say some heavy showers will develop through the afternoon into the evening in particular. And then down to the southwest, look at this, another bank of wet and windy weather sweeps in from the Atlantic. That's going to bring a pretty bleak day across parts of the south on Friday. Blustery winds and some heavy rain. It does look as if it'll turn a little drier as we head towards the weekend. Goodbye.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories, controversies and issues.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
It's 5 times the opinion, 5 times the debate, and 5 times the fun. The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You could wink at the end.
I can't believe I can't
Britain's
wink.
listening.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning, it's 11 o'clock. Welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce. On today's show.
Well, it's a big day on immigration because the government's going to relocate asylum seekers, they say, to ex-military bases and barges because they want to kick them out of migrant hotels. Other accommodation options are being considered, including disused cruise ships.
We'll also bring you up to date with the situation in Northern Ireland, where the terrorism threat was raised from substantial to severe yesterday. The move is based on MI5 intelligence, and it includes a recent attack on a police officer. We'll be finding out the latest.
And it's so sad, isn't it? The Queen Consort has joined others in paying tributes to celebrate the life and time of that fabulous TV presenter, Paul O'Grady, who sadly died at the age of 67. In a statement, his own partner, Andre Portasio, said Paul passed away unexpectedly but peacefully last night.
Thank you for joining us, whether you're watching on TV or listening on your radio this morning. Let us know your thoughts on all of the above. Email us gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first of all, here is your news with Ray Addison.
Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 11. Here's the latest. Thousands of asylum seekers will be housed in old military bases and on a giant barge, under plans due to be announced by the Immigration Minister later on today. It's the first major step in the government's pledge to end the controversial practice of housing asylum seekers in hotels. GB News understands that Robert Jenrick will unveil initial proposals to house 3,000 migrants in 2 disused RAF bases in Essex and Lincolnshire. Braintree District Council in Essex says it's applying to the High Court for an interim injunction. A new survey has found public satisfaction with the NHS has dropped to its lowest level since the survey began in 1983. The British Social Attitudes Survey also showed dissatisfaction has doubled in the last 2 years, with only 29% of people saying they're satisfied with how the NHS runs. An NHS spokesperson says it's investing up to £14.1 billion in health and social care over the next 2 years to support the workforce and patients. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting told us the main issue is staffing.
The NHS has suffered from terrible mismanagement over the course of the last 13 years by the Conservatives that's left the system desperately short of the staff it needs to get patients seen on time. That's led to the highest waiting lists in the history of the NHS and the lowest patient satisfaction ever. And what I hear commonly from patients, and I experienced this a bit myself with my experience with kidney cancer a couple of years ago, people could not be more praising of NHS staff. They think they're doing a brilliant job, but there simply aren't enough of them.
Diesel is being sold for around 17 pence a litre more on average than petrol, despite wholesale prices for both fuels being virtually identical. The RAC says the average price of a litre of petrol across the United Kingdom is 146.6 pence, whilst diesel is 164.2 pence. They say fuel companies are failing to pass wholesale prices on to customers. Mourners will gather later for Baroness Betty Boothroyd's funeral. The former Labour MP died last month, aged 93. She was the first and only woman so far to be elected Speaker of the House of Commons. Both Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer are expected to attend the service in Cambridgeshire. The King and Queen Consort will arrive in Germany for their state visit this afternoon. They're both expected to receive military honours at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, followed by a state banquet hosted by Germany's president. It's Charles and Camilla's first foreign visit as heads of the royal family, but the King's 29th trip to Germany in all. The pair were previously scheduled to visit France this week as well, but the trip was postponed due to nationwide protests over pension reform. Well, the Queen Consort is said to be deeply saddened at the death of TV presenter Paul O'Grady, who died last night, aged 67. She says his warm heart and infectious humour lit up the lives of so many. His partner, Andre Portasio, said he died unexpectedly but peacefully. Broadcaster Pete Price was a friend. He says he changed television.
What I loved about him was was very shrewd. He knew when to hang up the frock for Lily Savage. He knew exactly what direction he was going with in his career. But we must never forget also, he totally changed tea time television. He was getting 4 or 5 million people watching his chat show. Nobody'd ever done that. He brought out amazing new audiences to television.
And UK scientists have discovered an ultra-massive black hole around 33 billion times the mass of the Sun. Astronomers at Durham University say the extremely exciting galactic discovery is one of the biggest ever found. The origins of black holes, the most massive objects in the universe, is still unclear. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Bev and Andrew.
Well, we're going to talk a bit more about Paul O'Grady, I think, aren't we?
Yeah,
some
really
of these
sad,
views out because Susan said I had to read the news twice this morning, and even then I couldn't believe it. Immediately I thought I'll never hear his comforting voice again, cheering me up with his wit and his love. Having Paul in my world meant more than I realised. Very sad. World is now a different place.
Mel has said, why was Paul so loved? It's simple. He concentrated on being an entertainer and not mixing that with politics. How many people could say with any degree of certainty what political party he voted for? We need more stars like him, loved but not forgotten.
And Geraldine says, what a sad day. News of Paul is devastating. I cried this morning. Do you know, Bev, I think a lot of people would have cried this morning. I mean, Amanda clearly had a moment. Condolences to his family and friends and, of course, to his animals too. Yeah, all those dogs.
I know,
They've lost their dad. He loved them all. God bless you, Paul.
Yeah.
And Susan says, absolutely heartbroken. Condolences to Andre and all the family. So the government's announcing today, finally, that tens of thousands of migrants, or thousands anyway, are going to be relocated from around 400 hotels to former military bases and barges.
Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has been to one military base in Essex, expected to house up to 2,000 asylum seekers, and where locals have launched a campaign to resist the plans.
High above this Essex airbase, it's easy to see why the Home Office would view this facility as an attractive option to house asylum seekers. Across the site are multiple disused buildings, former residential blocks, which could easily be adapted to accommodate migrants. But right next to the Wethersfield Air Base is the village it took its name from. A quiet community now united in opposition to such a large-scale accommodation centre right on their doorstep.
At the moment, what we're expecting is from the 1st of April, the Home Office will take charge of the site.
Tony Clark-Holland, a leading voice in the campaign against the plans, says the communities around this base would be overwhelmed by such a large accommodation centre.
Some people are worried about voicing that concern because suddenly they're deemed to be racist, and that is not the case. If it was any group of young males, anywhere, people could feel concerned. The strain that would put on the local communities and local services. There's no facilities here. Obviously, if they needed anything, whether it's medical, emergency, we're just miles from anywhere.
At the weekend, more than 250 people from here in Wethersfield and surrounding communities gathered in the village hall to express those concerns. The local council revealed it plans to seek a High Court injunction to halt any attempt to use the base for asylum seekers.
Perfect. £8.63, please.
This tiny shop, come occasional post office, is the only store in Wethersfield. The owner says the lack of any engagement from the Home Office is simply fueling their concerns.
If it's a detention centre, that's no good, surely, for people who are unfamiliar with the area, being cooped up in one small space. But then if they are allowed to roam free, then again, it's another concern. So we're not saying we don't want them, it's just the fact of it's not the right place to have them in a very secluded village.
This is a familiar pattern. Locals battling Home Office plans to house large-scale asylum accommodation centres in their communities. The vast majority of these campaigns have been successful, but for the government, every victory leaves them with a diminishing number of suitable sites. The Prime Minister has promised to end the controversial use of hotels to house asylum seekers. Larger scale accommodation centres on government-owned sites might seem like a logical move, but not to those who live right next to these planned facilities. Mark White, GB News, Wethersfield in Essex.
Thank you, Mark. Well, joining us now, GB News' political editor, deputy political editor, Tom Harwood. Tom, we were talking earlier, and there is a bit of confusion. The detail has not yet been revealed. Whether this will be extending capacity or whether it will be moving people already in hotels into these new facilities. Do we know the facts around that yet?
This is primarily about extending capacity. For the long-term, multiple sites that are being created, this isn't about moving people en masse from the hotels into these sites. This is about new arrivals coming to these sites. However, there are 2 sites that are going to be announced today, we expect, from the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, which will be focused on moving around 3,000 people who are currently in hotels as a preliminary measure into those sites. But for the most part, the almost 400 hotels that have already been booked out, some of which for 18 months have been block booked, those bookings won't be returning to the public. Most people are staying in those hotels.
That sounds like an admittance of defeat, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, it has been for years, hasn't it? But I mean, at least they're moving some of them out. But Tom, already the old thing, not in my backyard's a problem. So we've heard the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is objecting to the plan to put people into the Wethersfield camp, and we know there's a huge backlash now against the one which was the Dambuster site. It's just about to come up to the 80th anniversary of where those
Scampton,
where those fabulous planes took off.
Yes.
Key part of the war effort, and there was a big development plan for that site, £300 million, which could now be scrapped.
It's a really intractable problem, of course, because there are these disused military sites around the country, many of which are not necessarily in the middle of nowhere, but far from settled developments of towns and villages. However, some, of course, hold great sentimental value, some of which are just near communities that don't want thousands of people to be bussed in near to them. But, of course, the question is, where do these people go? We don't have returns agreements with every country around the world, and ultimately the vast majority of the people that are in hotels, this isn't about people who've come here who have been granted asylum status. These are people who are seeking asylum, who are waiting for their claims to be processed, some of whom are waiting years, multiple years for them to be processed.
And we saw, haven't we, in the last week, Tom, Newquay, down there in Devon, big problems there with protests locally, and then protesters protesting against the protesters. It got very ugly down there, and the worry is if people stay on in these hotels, right in the heart of local communities, it could get ugly again.
It could indeed, and the issue with hotels, of course, is that they're not secure facilities. That's bad for the safety of those who are housed within them, but it's also bad for the safety of the communities that they are in. It's an imperfect solution and a very costly solution. £6 million a day being spent on these hotels. And Rishi Sunak, when he stood to become Prime Minister in the leadership election that he, of course, lost last summer, was saying one of his main pledges was to end the hotel farce. So clearly Rishi Sunak sees this as a big political problem to solve. However, it doesn't look like these proposals are going to solve it immediately. Ultimately, this has got to be a multi-pronged approach, not just new sites for those that are claiming asylum to stay in whilst the rest are sort of filtered out, but also speeding up the processing of those claims.
Absolutely critical. But Tom, we've got to move on, my love. Thank you.
Great to see you, Tom. Tom Harwood, editor.
So these plans to relocate these migrants, it's going to be obviously a big part of PMQs today. So joining us now is a Professor of British and Irish Politics at the University of Liverpool, John Tong. Good morning, John. We haven't got a typical PMQs today, of course. Isn't that because of the funeral of Betty Boothroyd, isn't it?
First woman speaker, so both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition will be there at that funeral this morning. So it's going to be Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary, who's been doing the media round today, and Angela Rayner, the Deputy Leader, who's always lively.
That's right, absolutely. But this will no doubt be discussed, John. We're coming at it quite fresh, this new proposal of moving migrants. There is still a little bit of confusion about it. It very much means when we're talking about this, we're not talking about the Rwanda plan. To what extent do you think this is about kicking sand in our eyes over immigration with these big headline projects, but not actually doing anything about it?
Well, it's been very difficult for the government to do what it wants because there's been so many protracted court battles over this issue. The government believes it's getting to where it wants to, but you've had protracted court battles. They will probably carry on. I mean, the government believes that public opinion is behind what it's trying to do. On the opposition benches, you've got very, very fervent opposition to what the government's trying to do. So it's a question, really. I'm not sure that this will ever be fully resolved. But Rishi Sunak has certainly made this a flagship policy of his with his "Stop the Boats" slogan, and believes that the public is on his side on it.
I think the public probably are. I would say they are. I know what I get in my email box, John, and they are, at least now the government is being seen to be trying to do something.
Yeah, I mean, there's no easy solutions to any issue of migration. I mean, and asylum seeking. I mean, if you look at the volume of asylum seekers, the government says these are not all genuine asylum seekers. And if you look at the local population, they can be quite hostile. But against that, the British government has a long record of being hospitable to genuine asylum seekers. So in terms of balance, it's very, very difficult. I don't think there's any. I don't think we're ever going to get political consensus over what to do. The government will always throw back at Keir Starmer. Will always say, well, what is your solution here? And it's true that the Labour benches have not necessarily offered one. I doubt we'll hear one at PMQs either.
No. Can we take you across the water, because you are Professor of British and Irish politics, John, at the University of Liverpool. The security level has been raised to severe. We know there was the shooting of that senior police officer in front of his own son and other children just a few weeks ago by a dissident IRA group. With all your experience of Northern Ireland, are we expecting another dissident attack?
Yes, if you look at the way the level of warning has been raised to severe, that shows that an attack is highly likely. That's the official definition of it. It's true the dissident Republicans have never gone away. The new IRA, in effect, replaced the old real IRA, which, of course, replaced the provisional IRA of old, which was responsible for a couple of thousand of deaths during the Troubles. I doubt that dissident Republicans will ever completely disappear this side of United Ireland. But we should keep the threat in perspective. The level of violence is only around 5% of the level that it was during the Troubles. If you look at before the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, 3,600 people died. Since then, 165 people have died due to the security situation. So the threat is not negligible, but it should be kept in proportion. And the police service in Northern Ireland was very keen to stress that yesterday, that whilst the public should be vigilant, we should keep this in proportion. I think the problem posed... Sorry, yeah.
No, I was just saying briefly, John, I want to pick up what you said. You said this side of a united Ireland. Do you see a united Ireland coming sometime soon, then?
No, I don't. Good. There's provision in the Good Friday Agreement for a border poll, but public opinion, if you look at the poll of polls, it shows there's about 10-11% lead for those favouring Northern Ireland staying in the United Kingdom over United Ireland. It's true the dial has shifted somewhat towards United Ireland since Brexit, but not substantially, not to the point where the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and it's in his gift, will actually call a border poll.
OK, all right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. John Tong there from University of Liverpool. Right, moving on. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt faces MPs from the Treasury Committee this morning. He's already faced them, I believe, answering questions on the spring budget.
And he's admitted that mistakes were made, not in his budget, but the mini-budget. You remember Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng? He said big mistakes were made in that.
How I guess he would, wouldn't he? Let's get more with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Mic. So what's he been saying, Jeremy Hunt? He's blaming Liz Truss for this mess, is he?
Yeah, this hearing is ongoing. As we speak, the Chancellor's appearing in front of the Treasury Select Committee of MPs. He's talking about a range of issues. I've been watching it this morning, and that line did catch my eye, and I thought I'd bring it to you. So, look, what's really happening here is that the kind of Jeremy Hunt, Rishi Sunak wing of the Conservative Party are pressing home their advantage. They've had a good couple of weeks. The Windsor framework seems to have worked according to most people, though, of course, the DUP don't like it. They seem to be making some progress with small boats. There's talk now of maybe the Tories can win the election. The poll lead is narrowing. So Jeremy Hunt's taking a bit of a risk here, gloating a little bit, really sticking it, if you like, to the former Prime Minister Liz Truss and her then-Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. This is what he told the Treasury Select Committee of MPs about that mini-budget back in September.
Yes, there were some mistakes in the mini-budget which we had to reverse. And in particular, I think it's clear you can't fund tax cuts through increased borrowing. So that is a clear thing that we changed course on.
really strong language there, and he's saying to the right of the Tory party, look, forget about tax cuts.
Yeah.
They're not going to happen, certainly not until we're much, much nearer a general election. Behave yourselves. The ERG, obviously, didn't really show in that rebellion against the Windsor framework, even though Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and Ian Duncan Smith, three former leaders, two former Prime Ministers, voted against the current Prime Minister.
Where have the Tory rebels who want lower taxes got to go, Liam? That's the point. Because Rishi Sunak, his people were saying the other day, it's his party now.
Well, you know what? I think they will come again because I think a huge swathe of the country actually agrees with them.
So do I.
Look, there's the history of that mini-budget. Never has a mini-budget been so mini. That will be poured over by many, many historians. I personally think the real reason the markets went haywire after that mini-budget wasn't so much because of the fiscal measures that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng wanted to introduce. It was because the Bank of England the day before decided that would be a good time, just before this mini-budget, to start selling loads of bonds back to the markets. That sounds complicated, and in another context, I could do a lot more to explain it.
But was that willful by the Bank of England to wreck the budget?
Well, I'm not sure. I certainly think the Bank of England were very, very happy when Jeremy Hunt, very much a sort of Treasury man, identikit Chancellor, not a kind of envelope-pushing Chancellor, came in. And there was something else so far during this testimony from Jeremy Hunt that I think will backfire on him. He's been saying, look, in the in his budget, he wants to do two things. He wants to get people back to work, and he did that by trying to raise the pension cap. It only really applies to the wealthiest 1% of pensioners. And he also said that he wanted to create an investment environment for business. And he said that we've now got the best investment environment for business of the major economies. I just don't think that's true. Corporation tax has just gone up from 19 to 25%.
Yeah.
And here's something else that I've sussed out since the budget. You know, politicians often say to me, oh, but you only pay corporation tax at 25% above £250,000 profit, and up to £50,000 you don't pay anything. Actually, between £50,000 and £250,000 profit, these are still quite small businesses employing a dozen people or so. You actually pay, you go from 19 to 26.5%. So by the time you get to 250 grand, you've paid 25% on the whole lot. So the sort of marginal increase in your tax rate, if you if your business makes more than £50,000, a lot of small businesses are just sussing this out.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a plumber running a small business, you might make 50 grand, right? Because that's how you feed your family.
Yeah.
And you immediately pay above, once you go above that 250 grand, you start paying 26.5%, which is a huge increase. So I think those comments are going to backfire on him.
And it's a disincentive. It's a
huge disincentive.
To employ more people, to make more money, to invest.
In fairness to him, there is now 100% full deduction taxable allowance on investment, but it tends to be the big businesses that invest more and can use those taxable investment allowances.
Most of this country is in the services industry. So doesn't get that.
And you don't get those massive investments of capital equipment that you can use to use those deductions
Thank you, Liam. Thank you. There's tons we could have talked about. Right, still to come. William Hill is set to pay a whopping £19.2 million for widespread and alarming failures. But why isn't the gambling regulator suspending the licences of companies that break the rules? We'll find out in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Well, it's 11:27. You're with The Point with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. Look, lots of people getting involved in the big debate about migration and moving those asylum seekers out of hotels. Look, this is my favourite. Jacqueline, oh you for being cynical. She says, just give them all British citizenship as they land on the beach. Then they'll be at the bottom of the housing list with no chance of being housed. I think that will resonate with a lot of people.
We've got an amazing story tomorrow, actually. You must tune in about a British woman who's had a baby, but she can't live here with her German husband, but we will be talking about that tomorrow. It does shine a light on how ridiculous some of our immigration policy is. Gordon has said there's only one way to stop the Channel crossings. We should have learnt from the Australians. The small boats must be returned to France, and if the French complain, they can take us to court.
All right, there are lots more views coming in. Now, a male domestic abuse campaigner has warned schools that they share a blame in making social media influence Andrew Tate popular among young boys. This all comes as a YouGov survey found almost a third of young men thought society didn't care about them. That's
right. The 36-year-old Romanian has been detained, it's Andrew Tate, of course, since December the 29th. He's accused of human trafficking, rape and being part of an organised crime group. Well, joining us now for more is the Associate Professor of Sociology at Swansea University, Ashley Frawley. Ashley, good morning. Lovely to see you. I am a little conflicted about Andrew Tate. I can't deny it. As the mother of a teenage boy and the mother of teenage girls, you look at him in two different views. To some extent, for the boys, there is something that he represents that they like. For the girls, I find him quite terrifying. Ashley, explain why he's so popular.
I think generally in society now we seem to have, we seem to be offering very little to young men and to young women to a certain extent. But I think there is a huge gap where becoming a man no longer has any meaning. And in fact, it can be quite stigmatized. It can be associated with all sorts of evils and violence and so on. Certainly there have been campaigns for a long time that in order to get people's attention around domestic violence, they tell horror stories. And just gradually over time, when you tell a lot of bad stories and you have a lot of campaigns around male violence, the idea comes across that men generally are violent. It's not just that. There are all sorts of other things going on. If you don't go to university, what are you going to do with yourself, right? Getting married is kind of take it or leave it. And so all societies have rites of passage. All societies have a situation in which a young person goes through some sort of rite and comes out the other side at a higher status than they were before. Our society doesn't have that. In fact, when you become an adult, it's kind of meaningless. And even you might even be passing into a lower status. Our society says that children are the future, which kind of says adults aren't. that adults of today can't deal with problems and even they're the cause of problems. That's a real bad message to give to young people. That's a bad kind of cultural ethos that we have, a cultural belief that we have. And I think as long as we keep blaming these individuals, bad though they may be, we will never have this open societal conversation about what it means to be an adult and to give young people a meaningful adulthood and rites of passage that recognize that they become something better and bigger than they were before.
What Andrew Tate was, I'm saying was because obviously he's not on social media at the moment because he's banged up in Romania, but what he was extremely good at was social media. He was good at putting out his videos, incredibly articulate, incredibly smart in some ways, and really understood his audience. He espouses a view, doesn't he, of hard work, not drinking, clean living. A lot of what he says, I have no problem with. But it's his views around women that are incredibly troubling. Partly, sometimes it's hard to tell whether he's saying it slightly with his tongue in his cheek, whether he knows he's being deliberately provocative, saying that women should be in the kitchen and they shouldn't be going out to work and that men should make money. It's all very kind of prehistoric attitudes. But there's something about the way that he talks to men, young men in particular, that they like that, actually. You know, it gives them certainty. And we've let down a whole generation of young men if they look into that and aspiring to be that without understanding the needs of women. How do we get that balance right?
Yeah, I think what these people are speaking to is a gap. They're looking for some authority, somebody who will tell them, look, what does it mean to be a man? What am I supposed to do here? Because for about 20, 30 years, it's been a bit like anything goes, right? I remember when I was growing up, I was so confused, and I would ask my dad, like, Dad, what should I do? And what should I do with my life? And he was like, whatever makes you happy. And I was like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. I want you to tell me. Give me something firm that I can hold on to. And I think people really struggle when everything is fluid, that you do need some strong boundaries and rules. And as long as we keep forgetting about that, these people will come in and they will fill that gap. And the other thing that Andrew Tate did very well was he fed off of cancel culture. He said deliberately provocative things, knowing that the attempts to shut him up would make him famous. And that's a lesson for everyone if you don't like Andrew Tate.
All right, Ashley, that's Ashley Frawley from the University of Swansea. Now, still to come, Jeremy Corbyn is fighting back. He's calling it a shameful attack by Keir Starmer. He's been blocked, of course, for standing for the Labour Party at the next general election.
We'll be discussing all of that after your morning's news with Ray.
It's exactly 34 minutes past 11. Here's the latest. Thousands of asylum seekers will be housed in old military bases and on a giant barge in plans due to be announced by the Immigration Minister later on today. It's the first major step in the government's pledge to end the controversial practice of housing asylum seekers in hotels. Robert Jenrick will unveil initial proposals to move around 3,000 migrants into 2 disused RAF bases. GBNews understands that the Home Office has already secured the use of the bases in Essex and Lincolnshire. However, it will face legal challenges. A new survey has found public satisfaction with the NHS has dropped to its lowest level since the survey began in 1983. The British Social Attitudes Survey also showed that dissatisfaction has doubled in the last 2 years, and only 29% of people are satisfied with how it runs. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting told us the main issue is staffing.
The NHS has suffered from terrible mismanagement over the course of the last 13 years by the Conservatives that's left the system desperately short of the staff it needs to get patients seen on time. That's led to the highest waiting lists in the history of the NHS and the lowest patient satisfaction ever. And what I hear commonly from patients, and I experienced this a bit myself with my experience with kidney cancer a couple of years ago, people could not be more praising of NHS staff. They think they're doing a brilliant job, but there simply aren't enough of them.
Well, the Bank of England says UK banks are resilient despite global turmoil in the banking sector. However, amid the current volatility, the central bank says there's an urgent need to support market-based finance, such as some hedge funds. Meanwhile, households and businesses are being warned they do face the risk of higher borrowing costs due to the impact on bank funding. And the King and Queen Consort will arrive in Germany for their state visit this afternoon. They're both expected to receive military honours at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, followed by a state banquet hosted by Germany's president. It's Charles and Camilla's first foreign visit as heads of the royal family for the King's 29th trip to Germany. On TV, online, DAB, plus radio and tune in as well. This is GB News. Back to Bev and Andrew in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Really interesting story. 3 gambling businesses owned by William Hill, they're going to have to pay a fine of almost £20 million for failing to protect customers. It's the largest settlement in the history of the Gambling Commission.
The gambling company has been fined for widespread and alarming social responsibility and anti-money laundering failures. But maybe the Commission should be doing more to tackle firms that break the rules. So joining us now is the sports lawyer and head of Front Row Legal, Richard Kramer. Good morning, Richard. This seems like an unusually large figure, is it, for a gambling firm to be held banked to rights like this? Is there a legal precedent for this, or do they get to appeal?
Well, there was a big fine last year on Ladbrokes and Corals. I think they were in for 17 million. And my research shows that altogether there's been 26 different fines totaling £76 million since the start of 2022. So it looks as if the Gambling Commission is very heavily penalising these gambling companies. It looks as if it's a surefire bet that we're going to see these fines imposed repeatedly over the next few months and years.
You know, it seems a lot of a big fine, Richard, but the turnover of William Hill, 1.8 billion in a year, 1.8 billion, 19.2 million is nothing. And, you know, one new customer that they were concerned about, spent £23,000 in the first 20 minutes of opening an account with William Hill. A scandalous failure, dereliction of social responsibility, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, it has other connotations. I think the first one is these fines could continue, but very soon a licence will be taken away from one of these big bookmaking firms. And that's really the only time when perhaps it will really hit them, when a licence is taken away. But I think it will also have an impact. We have the white paper on the new football regulator, and there is every chance now that betting companies will not be allowed to appear on sponsorship events, nor on the front of a shirt. So it's a serious problem. Clearly, the Gambling Commission are coming down very heavily for some of these fairly important issues such as social responsibility and anti-money laundering. So I think it's the start of a continued campaign here, and quite rightly so.
Richard, what have they actually done in terms of social responsibility? How is that assessed? What have they done wrong?
Well, clearly, individuals must have a limit on what they can spend. I read somewhere that even though I think one particular person had a £75,000 limit, and yet they allowed a £100,000 bet to be to take place. But I think they're not doing enough checks, and clearly it's causing a lot of heartache amongst families. We know that, unfortunately, a gambling addiction can be quite widespread, but it can have quite a big impact on the family. And it looks as if the betting companies are more obsessed with their turnover and profits than they are in terms of looking after, by way of social responsibility, their particular punters. So it does look as if at the moment it's more about profits than it is about ensuring people's lives are kept intact.
Yeah, OK. Thank you, Richard. Richard Kramer there, Head of Front Row Legal. When you put it like that in terms of the profit and that fine, it's not much, is it, really?
1.8 billion turnover and a fine of 90 million. They were fined 6 million in 2018. One guy ran up £32,500 of debts in 2 days. It's scandalous. It's easy, isn't it? Mand Patel's back with us in the studio.
It's so difficult to control because these days on online betting, how do you know somebody hasn't got 6 different accounts?
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
But the thing is, they're not making enough effort, are they?
Well, I tell you, I'm not anti-betting.
No,
I'm not anti-betting. I'm not a gambler myself. I do the lottery and I do, you know, the Grand National. But if you go to somewhere like Cheltenham, you know, the annual meeting, the betting industry is a huge, colourful part of British life sometimes, and we wouldn't close down the drinks industry because people got drunk. There are exceptions. People's lives do get badly damaged, and they have got to take more care not to do that. But I think it is the exception rather than the rule.
The checks they're not doing.
Yeah, the checks, yes, absolutely, yeah.
Now, we want to talk about the new portrait of the King. It's on a lot of the front pages today, painted by Alistair Barford. Let's take a look, see what you think. Well, Amanda Patel, what do you make of that?
I think it's gorgeous, Andrew. And if you remember, in my study, I once had my portrait painted.
It's a great picture.
Oh, I remember phoning up the artist and I said, is it vain to buy my own portrait? And he said, no one will think you're vain hanging up this picture. It has me, like, in split dimensions.
Yeah.
One looking like a complete harridan and one looking like a sort of sex worker.
Yeah, it's a great picture. I won't say it's a great likeness, Amanda. I won't say it's a great likeness.
But that is it's a really beautiful, it's tender.
And he's got on his wristband, it's a bracelet denoting
the work he's done to try and help climate change.
He was there 30 years ago, before...
Yeah. And all a lot of people were doing were mocking him for talking to plants, when in fact he was very aware of the world in which he lived, which included plants. On that picture of the King, who's that bloke who used to advertise biscuits, you know, with...
His hair looks like that,
you know, with snowy blonde hair. I mean, it's just not... That's not his natural hair colour. That is too snowy. I think I'm right in saying the artist who painted this, and you were right to say, Andrew, that this has been done since he became king, so very rapidly.
Yeah.
I think the same young artist,
Alistair Barford is the
painted the Queen Mother.
Yeah.
So he's, you know, he's very, you know, well versed. For him and stand there.
He looks very distinguished.
No, I think his hair's too
the last
snowy.
person who should be going on about grey hair.
Well, no. My hair's distinguished. It's not.
Going to be him on
We
the
are.
show.
And we want to mention, talking royals, because, of course, the Queen Consort has put out a very moving statement about the death of Paul O'Grady, which is a terrible blow for everybody.
Andrew, I was thinking about this after we spoke earlier, and I've actually felt really devastated when I heard this morning, even though, you know, I didn't know him well, but I felt as though I'd lost a friend. But then I've been thinking about it subsequently, and your mum had a beautiful death. Betty,
She did.
the wonderful Betty.
Yeah, she did.
She died in her sleep.
Very peacefully.
All her clothes were packed for the next day to go shopping with Auntie Margaret.
Yep.
My mum and dad died in their bed, holding hands. And I think that he had a beautiful death.
Because his partner's put out a statement saying he was peaceful
He was
and at home.
At home, he didn't go through suffering. He didn't go through horrible treatment and all sorts of things. So in the end, I think life was kind to him in the end.
Yeah. What about this story in the papers about men? More men now having plastic surgery. I want to ask you, like Parry, we want an honest answer.
Yes.
Have you ever had plastic surgery?
Well,
If so, can you get your money back?
That was a bit unkind.
That was a very unkind comment, very question. No, I can honestly say I've never had plastic surgery.
But would you?
No, I never will. Why should I? I'm enjoying entering early middle age, OK? And the stage of life...
Early middle age?
Yes, that's right, early middle age.
Have you had Botox, Mike?
No, I'd never put Botox.
Fillers or anything like that? Lip fillers?
No, nothing. I swear, you know, hand on heart. Didn't Boris say he was going to swear hand on heart?
Yeah, and he had his hands on the desk.
Exactly. Well, I'm swearing hand on heart with my hand on my heart. I've never had any work done on my face or any other part of my anatomy. And I am enjoying growing into the world as time goes on, and I don't want to change my... And by the way, if anybody suddenly turns around and says, no, you need a bit of work, you're looking ugly, you're looking old, I'll tell them where to go. Right. Because I'm very happy in my own skin.
We think you look... And Amanda, what about you? You look always at fabulous and radiant. Have you ever had any work done? Bearing in mind I'm your friend of 30 years standing and I know the answer.
I have never lied about this. I've never had surgery. I've never had a facelift or anything like that. But I've had the vampire facelift, the lunchtime facelift, the after-work facelift, which are all kind of, you know, whacking your face around.
And do you think more men should do it?
I know lots of men do it now. And it's just that they're not as honest as me. You know, I don't lie about...
But you're living a lie. You're living a lie. If you want to change your appearance, you're not who you are. You're just living a lie. I mean, for instance, supposing Keith Richards suddenly decided to have a facelift. One of the great faces of the 20th century and early 21st century would be desecrated, wouldn't it? Desecrated.
It's very different from having a bit of work done. I admit more work than the M25. I'm not ashamed of it.
And Mick Jagger...
And so have all my girlfriends.
Mick Jagger too.
He could do with some work.
Well, no, I don't think so, because...
more lines in an Ordnance Survey map.
I don't think so. Doesn't Simon Cowell pop up every now and then, looking a bit different to the way he looked 3 weeks earlier?
Mike and Amanda, thank you. We've come to the end of the show. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. This is The Point with Andrew and Bev. We'll be back tomorrow at 9:30.
See you then.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. Tomorrow should be brighter, but for most today's a fairly drab affair. It will get a bit brighter this afternoon across parts of Northern Ireland. It's fairly breezy, and the outbreaks of rain being caused by this area of low pressure, which is throwing weather fronts up across the UK. As this cold front clears, as I mentioned, Northern Ireland will turn brighter before sunsets, but elsewhere, say a lot of cloud round, outbreaks of rain, heavy at times over southwest Scotland, spreading into Wales, western parts of England. Something a bit brighter too at times to the east of the Pennines and maybe across the southeast, but most fairly glum, heaviest rain in the west. It's pretty mild, temperatures getting into the teens, maybe 15 or 16 with a bit of brightness here and there, but it is also fairly breezy. The breezy and wet weather will push into northeast England and eastern Scotland this evening. Another zone of rain then develops in the southwest. That spreads across parts of Wales up towards the Midlands and eastern England through the night. Turning a little drier across Scotland and Northern Ireland, some clearer spells likely here, but isn't going to be a cold one. Temperatures in many places staying in the high single figures, double digits across most towns and cities for England and Wales. We start Thursday then with a lot of cloud and still some outbreaks of rain over the east, but that should clear away. And generally speaking, a much brighter day tomorrow. I think we'll see some good breaks in the clouds, some sunny spells. There will be showers. It's far from a completely dry day. The showers tending to move through on that brisk breeze. But when the sun's out, temperatures a little higher than today's, 16, 17 degrees likely in a few places. But say some heavy showers will develop through the afternoon into the evening in particular. And then down to the southwest, look at this, another bank of wet and windy weather sweeps in from the Atlantic. That's going to bring a pretty bleak day across parts of the south on Friday. Blustery winds and some heavy rain